Hjertelig velkommen alle sammen. Nå står vi endelig her for avspark for Musikk Ut i Verden konferansen. Mitt navn Margit, og jeg kommer fra Innovasjon Norge.
Jeg heter Helene, og er fra Musikk Norway. Sammen har vi jobbet med et større team for dette programmet som heter Musikk Ut i Verden. Teamet har bestått av meg og Margit, og Kathrine, Ingvild, Frank, Knut, Jonas, Tina, Rosa, Karoline med flere. En kjempefin gjeng.
Og anledningen for denne konferansen, det at vi ved veis ende for eksportprogrammet Musikk Ut i Verden. Og fra før har vi gjennomført flere eksportprogram, både litteratur, arkitektur og for spill. Eksportprogrammene en del av regjeringens satsing på kulturell og kreativ næring, og et oppdrag fra Kultur- og likestillingsdepartementet til Innovasjon Norge.
Vi veldig glad for at Kultur- og likestillingsministeren kunne være her i dag. Så velkommen til deg. Vi skal gi ordet til deg litt etterpå. Vi har et fullspekket program i dag med smarte folk fra både musikkbransjen og fra filmbransjen. Så vi håper at disse timene som vi har foran oss nå vil gjøre oss alle litt smartere, og at vi står bedre rustet for alle utfordringer og muligheter som kommer.
Og så litt praktisk, det må også til. Mat og drikke står på stasjoner rundt omkring i lokalet. Nødutgangene, det helt innerst i lokalet, i bakerste lokalet, til venstre for meg, ned trappen, og til høyre. Og så har vi toaletter i denne etasjen og i første etasje. Da det også sagt. Og så det bare å huke tak i oss hvis det noen spørsmål. Så har vi et veldig tett program. Programmet tett, tiden knapp, og pausene veldig få. Det har vi gjort for å få en veldig, veldig effektiv dag. 3 timer konferanse for å bli belønnet med en sommerfest etterpå. Så bær med oss, vi skal lose dere igjennom så godt vi kan.
Vi kjempeglade for så mange kunne komme. Det noen ledige stoler fortsatt, men noen kommer etter hvert. Da det egentlig klart for å åpne Musikk Ut i Verden-konferansen.
Det det. Vi har da æren av å ønske Kultur- og likestillingsminister Anette Trettebergstuen opp på scenen. Ordet og scenen din.
Den på? Ja. Tusen takk for det. Utrolig kult å være her og se så mye bra folk. Altså Musikk Ut i Verden, et musikkeksportprogram gjennom en pandemi. Det var ikke akkurat de beste kåra for et musikkeksportprogram. Og da programmet ble lansert i 2019, så ante vi kanskje heldigvis ingenting om hva vi hadde i vente. Pandemien kom, den varte og den rakk, og den har vært ekstremt hard for mange, men spesielt dere som på ulike måter involvert i musikk. Og selv om folk myldrer ut på konserter og på kinoer, og meteren overhodet ikke holdes lenger, og vi ikke trenger å tenke på den, så det jo slik at ettervirkningen av koronaen kommer nok til å ha med oss en stund i de forskjellige kulturelle næringene. Det tror jeg mange av dere vet veldig godt og fortsatt kjenner på kroppen. Så prøvde vi så godt vi kunne med stimuleringsmidler og kompensasjonsmidler og holde hjula i gang gjennom pandemien. Men som sagt, det tar litt tid før folk tilbake til sine gamle vaner. Men mye tyder på at folk ønsker å gå tilbake og fortsette å være publikum. Og det håper jeg at snart skjer. Vi trenger kunst og kultur alle sammen, både som enkeltmennesker, men også som samfunn. Det som overhodet ikke kommer av seg selv, det jo den internasjonale aktiviteten, utvekslingen og samarbeidene, og ikke minst eksportinntektene. Det vet jo dere alt om. Det var jo tøft før koronaen kom, men det enda tøffere nå. Derfor så har regjeringen satt i gang eksportsatsingen Hele Norge eksporterer. Ikke mindre enn det. Hele Norge skal faktisk eksportere. Målet å doble fastlandseksporten innen 2030, og det gjelder selvfølgelig også for kulturell og kreativ næring. Det målet ganske ambisiøst, men det må det være, synes vi. Tidligere så var eksport for mange kanskje en mulighet, nå det en nødvendighet. Og vi helt avhengig av å doble eksportinntektene fra annet enn olje og gass for å få økonomien til å gå rundt, også gjennom det grønne skiftet. Når det gjelder kultur og kreative næringer, så handler jo ikke det om å tilrettelegge for eksport om nødvendigvis om økte inntekter til felleskassa. Den kulturelle innsatsen og eksporten av den handler jo mer om å bidra til aktivitet, utveksling og samarbeid på tvers av landegrenser, fremme dialog og ikke minst, da det et mål i seg selv å støtte opp om den frie kunsten. Mens den næringspolitiske innsatsen skal styrke konkurransekraften til norsk næringsliv og bidra til handel, økonomisk vekst og verdiskaping og inntekter til Norge. Musikk ut i verden et slikt tiltak. Utgangspunktet for programmet det eksportpotensialet som den norske musikken, de norske talentene og den norske musikkbransjen representerer. Den internasjonale etterspørselen etter norsk musikk øker, og det kult. Og norske produsent- og låtskrivertalenter gjør det stadig bedre i det globale markedet. Bak alle artister, låtskriver og produsenter så står det jo et enda større apparat, og det vet dere best av alle. Og det denne delen av apparatet programmet retter seg mot. Først og fremst for å få norsk musikk ut i verden, men minst like viktig, bidra til at norske forlag, studiemiljøer og management bygger kompetanse, nettverk og eksportinntekter som kommer den norske bransjen og morgendagens musikalske talenter til gode. Som jeg sa, så fikk dette programmet en rimelig tøff oppstart i starten av en pandemi, og den avsluttes nå ved pandemiens slutt. Og jeg vet at dere har jobbet beinhardt for å få gjennomført dette flotte programmet. Og har utvist både fleksibilitet og ikke minst heltemodig pågangsmot for å få dette her til. Og på grunn av pandemien så har jo åpenbart programmet blitt lagt opp på en litt annerledes måte, tidvis, enn det som var planlagt, med færre fysiske samlinger og flere digitale. Slik har verden vært en stund nå. Men det ble altså hele 12 samlinger for Musikk ut i verden totalt. Og nå vi altså ved veis ende ved avslutningskonferansen, og det utrolig imponerende det dere har fått til på tross av pandemien. Jeg har lyst til å rette en stor takk til Kathrine og Helene i Musikk Norway, og ikke minst til Margit og Ingvild i Innovasjon Norge, som har gjennomført dette som det 4. eksportprogrammet for kulturell og kreativ næring. I tillegg så pågår det nå et program for kreativ teknologi ut i verden, der selvfølgelig også musikkbransjen med og hører hjemme. I mars så var jeg så heldig at jeg fikk lov til å være i LA, og det var selvfølgelig veldig stas å få lov til å være på Oscar-utdelingen og se at Will Smith klappet til Chris Rock. Men høydepunktet med den turen var faktisk det å få lov til å møte deltakere fra Musikk ut i verden. Låtskrivere, produsenter, folk med erfaring fra å klare seg der borte, nye talenter fra Norge som var der for å lære. Vi brukte en dag sammen, og jeg lærte enormt mye om bransjen, om hvordan disse tannhjulene henger sammen, og ikke minst ble jeg inspirert til å være med som politiker og bidra til at enda flere kan prøve å klare det ute. Det et imponerende arbeid dere har gjort. Men det altså ingen snarveier til å klare seg der ute. Det hardt arbeid, og det må bygges stein for stein. Og selv om dette her en avslutningskonferanse, så det jo på mange måter nå jobben virkelig starter for de dyktige bedriftene som har deltatt i programmet. Vi vet at det kan være tungt å dra i gang aktivitet, og at det mye hardt arbeid som venter. Det nettverk som skal reaktiveres, nye kontakter skal etableres, det planer, prosjekter og samarbeid som skal utvikles, avtaler skal inngås, og en haug med aktiviteter skal gjennomføres. Vi som regjering og jeg som statsråd ønsker å være med på å støtte dere i det arbeidet og bidra til å få den internasjonale aktiviteten godt i gang igjen. Derfor har vi også bevilget 11 millioner kroner til Musikk Norway nå, som da skal fordele de midlene videre til artister, band, forlag, produsenter, management og andre aktører som skal opp og fram og ut i verden. Det har jo skjedd en formidabel både endring, men også profesjonalisering i bransjen de siste årene. Mye takket være enorm innsats fra dere som er her i dag. Og til alle dere så har jeg lyst til å si tusen takk for den jobben dere gjør. Og så er det en person som jeg tror jeg første gang møtte da jeg var 25 eller noe sånt nå, kanskje på Øyafestivalen. Men som alltid er overalt, har en finger med i spillet og en viktig rolle i det hele. Og som snart skal levere stafettpinnen videre, og som faktisk fyller 50 år neste lørdag. Da måtte jeg se over en gang til og spørre rådgiveren, er det sikker på at det er riktig? Er det 50 liksom? Kan vi se? Ja, ok, det var det. Ja, og dere har skjønt hvem jeg snakker om, og det er nettopp dagens konferansier og direktør i Musikk Norway, Kathrine. Kjære Kathrine. Kom opp på scenen. Jeg har lyst til å overrekke en blomsterhilsen til deg. Tusen takk for innsatsen, og gratulerer med den forestående 50-årsdagen. Igjen en klapp. Takk. Apropos Musikk Ut i Verden da. Hvert eneste år så deler jo Musikk Norway og Spellemann ut prisen Årets internasjonale suksess. Prisen skal løfte fram artister, låtskrivere og produsenter som har brakt norsk musikk utover landegrensene, og som fremmer norske suksesshistorier i utlandet, og som stimulerer en hel bransje til å satse internasjonalt. I år så gikk denne prisen til en fantastisk artist og låtskriver, nemlig Aurora. Så før jeg snart skal gå av scenen, jeg lover det, så vil jeg ha opp Auroras manager, Geir Ludi, opp på scenen. Gratulerer så mye med pris til Aurora. Nå vet jeg at hun skal få lov til å da gi denne prisen videre. Det er prisens karakter til 2 aktører. Og før hun etterpå skal fortelle oss hvem det er, så vil jeg bare overgi disse stipendene og diplomene til deg. Vær så god, og gratulerer. For de som ikke vet det, så er det altså, med den prisen så følger det et stipend fra Kultur, likestillingsminister. Og det heter «Det var her det hele begynte», og er på 100 000 kroner. Og det skal altså Aurora selv få lov til å gi videre til en person eller aktør, eller en organisasjon, eller et miljø som har bidratt til å inspirere og stimulere musikkinteressen til vedkommende. For som vi vet, så kommer ikke en musikkarriere av seg selv. Det er alltid noe eller noen som inspirerer og motiverer enhver aktør til å satse på musikken, når man av og til møter motgang, tror at det ikke går, eller stanger hodet i veggen. Så en sånn pris er viktig. Så vet jeg da at Aurora ønsker å dele ut denne prisen, eller stipendet da, på 100 000 kroner, til 2 aktører. Aurora kunne ikke være her i dag, men hun er med oss allikevel. Og da skal jeg få lov til å gi ordet til Aurora, så skal vi høre hvem hun gir prisen videre til.
Hallo alle sammen, Aurora her. Nå har jeg akkurat kommet hjem fra turné, og jeg kjenner i sjelen at jeg har savnet jorden og luften og sjeleroen man bare finner i Norge. Og når jeg føler meg ganske langt borte fra meg selv, som jeg ofte gjør på slutten av en turné, da reiser jeg til Rosendal. Og her er jeg nå. Nå er jeg i Rosendal og får skikkelig sjelefred. Luften lukter som fjell og natur, og det er bare helt nydelig. Og det er en grunn for at en av de jeg har valgt å gi disse pengene til, er Rosendal, fordi Rosendal har gitt meg så utrolig mye. Det ingenting viktigere for meg enn å finne steder der jeg kan skikkelig koble meg selv tilbake til deler av meg selv som jeg glemmer litt når jeg på reise, kanskje. Og nylig Anette Trettebergstuen som driver barnehage har gitt meg så mye glede. Jeg kunne aldri lage den siste platen min uten dette stedet. Og i mange år så har Rosendal gitt meg sjelefred og jeg trengte mest. Og vinner nummer 2, kjære Erik, han en trofast fan som har vært på mine konserter siden jeg var 17. Men han har alltid vært der, til og med han reiste til utlandet for å komme og se. Han har investert masse i meg før mange andre i verden gjorde det. Det ingen man kan takke mer egentlig enn Hansen, enn de som bare virkelig elsker musikk og støtter oss musikere. Så jeg vil takke også Erik og gi til han, fordi det betyr så mye. Så takk Erik for alt. Du vet jo hvor glad vi alle i deg, og støtten du gir alle oss bergensartister. Så vil jeg takke Kulturdepartementet og Musikk Norge for muligheten. Det var nesten den største bonusen, den største gleden med å få denne Spellemannsprisen var at jeg kunne dele litt av gleden med noen andre. Det var så gøy, jeg ble så glad når jeg hørte det. Så takk for denne nydelige sjansen, og alt dere gjør. Og
På vegne av vårt alles kjære Rosendal, Reidar og jeg jublende, glad og takknemlige, og ikke minst usigelig rørt over stipendet fra kjære, skjønne og fantastiske Aurora. Og det gleder oss stort at både musikere, billedkunstnere og forfattere finner hvile og inspirasjon i all den skjønnhet og naturprakt som finnes her på Baron i Rosendal, slik faktisk også nasjonalromantikkens kunstnere gjorde det da de var på besøk her på 1800-tallet.
Hallo. Tusen takk, og 1000 millioner takk for all musikk og alle opplevelser vi har fått på dine konserter, og alle andre konserter for den saks skyld. Jeg vet ikke, du beskriver det sykt vakkert. Jeg takker og takker. Jeg tør ikke si noe mer for det at jeg bare begynner å grine. Og resten av det. Ja, tenker på en enkel mann i låten. Tusen takk. Gleder meg til å ses. Lykke til.
Tusen takk til både Aurora, Geir og gratulerer til baroniet i Rosendal, Erik Hannesdal. Tusen takk til Kultur, likestillingsminister Anette Trettebergstuen. Vi er veldig glad for at du er med oss litt til videre. Og takk for den veldig overraskende oppmerksomheten. Jeg er jo da Kathrine Synnes Finnskog, direktør i Musikk Norge. Og ja, jeg skal være her ut året, hvis noen lurer på det. Så hvis det er noen som er noe usnakket, så har dere litt tid igjen. Det er bare å bring it on. Og de 11 millionene som kulturministeren refererte til, de er søkbare hos oss, og dere kan søke hele tiden. Det er rett og slett ongoing søknadsfrister. Men de neste 2 timene så skal jeg bidra med å være konferansier i dag. Det er veldig mange fine folk med utrolige både meritter og resultat som skal opp på scenen, dele erfaringer, og da er det rett og slett litt bare å komme i gang. Oppgaven min skal være å ta tida, passe på at noen kommer seg på, og at dere går av, og at dere som er gjester blir inspirert og motivert, både til å rett og slett gi jernet videre i musikkbransjen, men også til å gå på sommerfest klokka 3, selvfølgelig. Og som nevnt, det blir ikke så veldig lange pauser underveis, så hvis dere må gå ut for å tisse eller røyke, det er det mest spennende som skjer der ute, så skal dere få løp til det, men det blir noen pauser, og det mest spennende det skal skje her inne. Det skal gå litt både på norsk og engelsk, det regner jeg med dere tolererer, dere som tross alt jobber med musikkeksport, fordi lille Norge har jo låtskrivere, produsenter og komponister i verdensklasse. Og det rett og slett bobler under overflata av spirende talent som både skriver og skaper ny musikk. Og det gjør derfor et stadig større, voksende, globalt publikum. Og noen av dere passer jo på at de her talentene finner den veien ut, sørger for at låten finner publikum. So, what does it take to export a song or a beat? Det er første session ut. Det er Mike Herbrick fra Selective, manager og publisher for Alexander Pavlish, Carl Victor Guttormsen, Yuki og Skinny Days. You have been a part of the Musikk Ut i Verden program, and you will moderate this first session. You will bring to the stage Holly Astera from The Very Good, A&R Erik Elvenes in Arctic Rights, og Jamila Scott, A&R consultant for Tileyard og manager in your own company Into the Blue. So please take the stage.
Hello, everyone. We are here to talk about the song pitching process. And just to quickly say what that is before we get into it, all four of us work for companies where we represent songwriters and or producers, and we are all export focused, meaning we are trying to get the songs that our clients write out into the world. Whether that be Germany, the UK, the US, Asia, developing markets, can be anywhere. But the point is, we are trying to find artists out there in the big, wide world to listen to the songs our writers have made, like them, want to record them and release them. So what we're going to talk about in the next 33 minutes and 57 seconds is that process. Before we start, I guess we should introduce ourselves. I'll go first. My name's Mike. I run a company called Selective, which is a management company for writers and producers and also artists. We can just go down the line.
And I'm Holly Astera. I work at the management and publishing company, The Very Good, where we manage songwriters and producers.
I forgot to say one thing. Also, when you introduce yourselves, maybe just say a word about if there are any genres and or markets that you are focused on when you are pitching your songs.
And we're mainly focusing on international markets.
Cool. Is it on?
And dance pop, yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? No? Yeah. I'm Eric. I work at Arctic Rights, which is one of the largest indie publishers here in Norway. I oversee like the hip-hop and R&B, but also the Afrobeat, dancehall, reggaeton, and reggae genres. So yeah, I focus more on the songwriters, the composers, but also beat makers, and yeah.
Hi, I'm Jamila, and I work at a company called Tileyard Music in London, where we look at represent artists from a management perspective, publishing perspective, and we also have a label. And I also have my own management company.
Yeah. Okay. So we will try our best to go through the process of pitching songs internationally. I should say that there are sort of two assumptions that we're going to make in this conversation, so we don't need to spend too much time on those. One is that the songs that you eventually decide to pitch are good enough to pitch. And the other assumption is that you know who you want to pitch those songs to. So when we are having our conversations, we're just assuming that those two things are in place. Obviously, you need to use your ears and your experience and collaborate with your teams to figure that out. but we're going to skip that part of this conversation. So, my first question, I guess, is like with your rosters of writers and producers, how much time would you say they dedicate specifically to writing for pitch versus being in a session with an artist and writing directly to that artist? Holly.
I think, like, previously, before the pandemic, I think our writers and producers were in the studio like 50-50 with artists and writing for pitch. Then when COVID happened, I felt like that ratio turned into like 90-10. So we did a lot of pitching during the pandemic. So I'd say, I mean, when it comes, this is just my experience, but when it comes like to pop artists, especially like American pop artists, I feel like it's easier being in the room with the artist, writing for them. But when it comes to dance and DJ acts, I feel like pitching is the way to go.
So 50-50 pre-pandemic, 90-10 during pandemic.
Yeah, and I think right now we're kind of turning into like 30-70.
What about you two?
I would say probably, it depends who we're talking about on the roster.
Yeah.
As you know, lots of, particularly on our producer side of the roster, they actually prefer to be in the studio with the artist. So sometimes they're doing maybe 25% of their time writing for pitch. Predominantly that will be in writing camps where there's a specific brief. And then we have writers that kind of prefer the other which way around. So yeah, it really depends for us.
Mm-hmm. Well, I started at Arctic Rights for like 2 years ago, and that was mid in the pandemic, and we had focused on artists, but after the pandemic, no shows and stuff like that, you had to focus have your focus shifted. So we started working with producers in the hip hop and R&B, but also focusing on pitching the beats and stuff like that. So yeah, you became more beat pitching than kind of setting up sessions and stuff like that, and physically being in the sessions and stuff. So the beat makers, they use their time 100% of their work on pitching beats.
Yeah. Jamila, you mentioned the word brief when you talked about a camp, or I think that's what you said. You said the word brief, anyways. And for those who don't know, oftentimes there are briefs that get sent around by labels or management companies or whoever working with artists. That is basically what? A shopping list of what they want. We want a song that sounds like this, but not that, and this, and not that, and just a little bit of this, but not too much, and a little bit of that, but not too much. And yeah, and they all reference and ideally make it sound like whatever song is #1 in the world.
That's exactly,
at that time. But I have a question about briefs, which is in your collective experience, do you think, do they help? Are they useful? Has writing to a brief ever led to anything? Because when people are in studio writing for pitch, it can be to a brief, or they could just get together and decide to write the best song possible for whatever mood they're feeling. So these are the two sort of ways it can go.
I think briefs can be really helpful if they're very specific. And oftentimes I think it's probably better to have a brief on the sonic rather than potentially on the lyric. Just in my kind of experiences, I think that's something that's easier to click with if it isn't something that you as an artist maybe have written. So yeah, they're helpful if really, really specific, and definitely helpful for camps where you've got lots of different people kind of coming in and out of the studio, and maybe the artist might be in those camps, so it just kind of helps pull everything together so they're not pulled in too many different directions.
Yeah. Anyone else want to have a kick at this one? I can ask a more specific question about briefs, which is, I find in my own experience anyways, especially most recently, that there are a lot of briefs coming from Korea.
Yeah.
And they tend to be the most specific, and in my experience, slightly helpful, if you can nail it. Does anybody have any experience with that and it working?
they know what they want.
Yeah.
And they're very specific, and I feel like their A&Ring is totally different from like our A&Ring. So I feel like, but I mean, I can get kind of frustrated with my writers sometimes because they want briefs and they get briefs, but then the song that comes out of the session is a completely different song. So, I mean, briefs can be helpful for me when I'm pitching songs. If I already have one of those songs.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of songs, but I don't know. It depends. I also think like how serious the writers are taking this brief depends on. So yeah.
I think it's a love-hate thing about the briefs because
Yeah.
some of our writers are like, yeah, briefs are pretty good. If you have a period with the pandemic, you haven't had that much to do. Writer's block and the activity has gone down. So it's good to have something, sort of a way to work or fulfill your day. So, the briefs are pretty interesting. But I love, we have a guy which is our sync, responsible for sync, and he always sends these sync briefs, which I think is a very interesting, for me and my beat makers on the hip-hop roster. If you get some series or movies or advertisers which are looking for some sort of, type of song or beat or that makes things much easier for them than just making, again, these beat makers, they sit and make like 50 beats a week. So if you have something that you can like search your way into with the sync briefs, and maybe you can get something onto the Power song, season 2 of Power, or anything interesting, which is over in the States or over here in the UK or Europe, then it makes things much easier for them to kind of fulfill the day and kind of make their day much easier. So I'd love to say like the sync briefs, which are specific like for the advertisers, for the gaming and stuff, which is also very interesting coming on forward. It's helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So writers are working ish 50-50 pitch or with artists. So we'll take the 50% pitch and we'll move into what happens when you have the song. And that is that you have to pitch it. Which means send it to someone or a group of people. And the question I have about that is, who do you try and get it to when you're sending the song? Like, obviously, in the music business, there's a vast network and apparatus around all artists, that being label A&Rs, of which there's usually more than one in big markets. Could be their publishing A&Rs, could be their managers. I don't know, could be their agent, because, booking agencies now have all sorts of departments for people working in A&R and different stuff. Who do you, like, do you have like a set rule on, okay, I've got this song, I want to get it to artist A, I have to go to this person who's working with artist A? You guys, Eric, you can go first.
Yeah. Well, again, the beat making scene, the hip hop and R&B, I always encourage my beat makers to kind of get that relationship, because I feel like the music business is about relationship. You can send out these cold mails, you can send it you can get an email from an A&R or a manager or a publisher or whatever, and it's not that easy to get that, that placement or that cut you want to get, because the relationship is pretty much a very, very important value into, how the situation or how the project can go. So I would say, look more into getting like a good relationship with like songwriters or the producer, which is very heavily involved in the project for an artist, as well as like the manager, of course. But just get that relationship as close as possible to the project as possible.
What do you think, Jamila? In the UK pop and dance world, who are you aiming for?
We take a divide and conquer approach. So asking everybody in the team, artist included, writer included, who knows who of the specific artist that we want to pitch the song to, and then we will go completely round the houses, and often find that an approach where the manager is hearing the pitch song, the A&R is hearing the pitch song, and the publisher is hearing the pitch song, all at the same time, tends to work in our favor. Lots of different people talking about this brilliant record gets people excited, and then internally, when that artist kind of speaks to the rest of their team, they've got multiple people in the team saying that they're excited about this record. For us, really helps. So we kind of work out who in our team has those personal relationships and personal connections. So whether it is we know the publisher on the other side, or we know the manager on the other side. We'll work out who has got the best relationship and who in the team is going to email that person, who's going to email that person, or bring them in and play the song to them. So yeah, just a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah, just chiming on that, the hip hop, we don't go after like specific kind of rules and things. I had a guy who sent a beat to a cousin of a manager of an artist, and a week later the song was released. Of course, the publishing and spits and everything weren't on point, but it still came out. So you can say that just the relationship and how things can go through is it's just not specifically like as you think it should have been or should be.
Yeah, I just wonder, like, I mean, obviously the answers that you guys gave are good. They sort of depend on having relationships, I realized as I was listening to you talk, and of course, the longer you do it and the more successful you are, the more relationships you have, and the more solid they are and the more you can lean on them. But if you don't have them yet, because you're starting out, then is there like, should you just always try and find the manager first? Because in theory, the manager is closest to the artist. Do you know what I mean? Like, so if there's anybody in here who's just right at the start of their career and is sitting in Oslo and wants to pitch to whoever in London, you know what I mean? Like, there might not be one answer, but what should they do? Who should they look for if they're just basically internet stalking to find out who to get a hold of?
I think label A&R generally tends to be more, you've got more avenues then, because with the A&R, maybe it's not right, they obviously know exactly what's going on with the artist and what the next songs are going to be and what the project looks like, but they have a roster and they work in a team that also have their own rosters. So if that song doesn't specifically work at that time for the artist that you've pitched it for, there might be an up-and-coming artist they've just signed that maybe has similar, a similar palette to the artist you pitched for. So I always tend to kind of opt for, where I don't have that relationship, the label A&R.
Yeah. Okay. So now we've pitched our song to the label A&R, and the label A&R responds and says, I love it, I want to put it on hold. Does someone want to explain what that means, or what that can mean? And sort of how it works and when putting a song on hold is a good idea and when it's a bad idea. I'm more looking at you, Holly, and Jamila, just because obviously in the pop and dance world, asking to put songs on hold happens a lot. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in like other genres, but I'm pretty sure you are both dealing with this on a weekly basis. So someone says they want to put your song on hold. What does it mean, and what should you be thinking about in terms of if you should say yes or no to that?
I've had so many songs on hold, and I've had like the first single and the second single and the third single. I try to. It depends on the song. It depends on how much I believe in the song. If it's a really good song, then maybe. But if the song already finds a good home, then I feel there's no reason to stress, sometimes the song comes out in like 3 months and sometimes it's like 2 years. But you can have hold fees when you feel like, or maybe that artist has been holding on to songs for so long and you haven't seen anything. Because when the song is on hold, you're not allowed to pitch it anywhere else.
Yeah, that's an important thing to say.
Yeah.
If you say yes to a hold, it's exclusive. Otherwise, it's not hold. It's just they have it.
Exactly.
So you're basically saying yes, you and only you can work on producing this song.
And then eventually, if it takes a couple of months and then you get like a demo with the artist's vocal on, or if it's a DJ, then if you feel some kind of like traction, something is happening with the song, then I'm fine with holding it for a while. But it's kind of like, I've also been in situations where you've been like, okay, we're holding the song, and you sign a contract, and then the song never releases, and then you're like, okay, but we signed a contract. Is this like, can I pitch it or not? So it's depending on. Also, speaking about relationship, it depends on the relationship as well. Like how much, how well do I know this manager or label, and can I have we done songs in the past, and so it's case by case, I think.
Yeah, I'd pretty much echo what you've just said, and that it's so dependent, and you see, don't kind of know, you don't always have the context of what other songs that artists might be working on, so it's quite hard to kind of judge how long something should be on hold for, but I think it kind of works in, definitely on our side, it works in our favor when, you know, maybe you've sent that particular song out on a, you know, it might be on a dance reel or a pop reel or with a few other songs, and that's the song that everybody kind of keeps talking to you about. One person has it on hold, then obviously you have a bit of leverage to kind of, you know, hopefully they confirm that they're going to use it. But yeah, everything is case dependent, really. It's a tricky question.
Yeah, but like if you're going to say yes to a hold, either because it feels good or because you have no other options, so you might as well just say yes and make them excited. You know, there has to be a time frame on it. Otherwise, they just are sitting on it forever. Like, what do you 6 weeks ish? 4 to 6 weeks?
I mean, that's a really short time, and
yeah, I know. That's what I do. I'm just asking you what you do. That's what I do.
If it's Rihanna, I mean.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I guess none of us are sitting with songs with Rihanna on hold, though, so we can skip that bit.
I think, like, I don't know, 3 months?
Yeah, 3 months.
Depends on how good the song is.
So I'm being hard-ass then with 6 weeks. Yeah.
I mean, if it's a DJ and I've already had, like, 4 other songs on hold, then I need to, like,
Okay. Let's see here. Right. I think now we will probably get into the bit of this panel where we will have the most to say, so I'm glad we have a little bit of time left. And that is, you pitch a song, someone likes it, maybe they put it on hold, maybe they don't, it doesn't matter. But you've gotten to the point where the artist has recorded it sounds good, everybody likes it, and then you get the email saying, let's agree the splits. The splits being the percentage of the publishing that each writer involved in the song gets. Obviously, at the start, when you pitch the song, 100% of the publishing is sitting with the writers that wrote the original song, right? We all get that. Whether there's one of them or 4 of them, right? 100% is in there. But then you send it out, and maybe someone tweaks the lyrics, maybe they don't. Maybe someone adds some stuff to the production, maybe they don't. Maybe it's just an artist who thinks that they should get publishing because they're famous. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Maybe even though they didn't write the song. What's like, I don't know. How do you navigate this? Let's say that someone has made a few adjustments, lyrical tweaks, and added a bit to the production. You know what I mean? Like, how do you, because oftentimes you want this artist to cut the song, right? I mean, that's the name of the game. You can't make money if the song doesn't come out. So you don't want to, like, submarine it, you know, and kill it, but you don't want to rip off your writers. How do you navigate that, basically? Holly.
I try to be fair. Like, if
What does that mean?
if there has been tweaks or little changes to just like to amend to the artist's story or whatever, then that should be reflected somehow in the publishing splits. But I mean,
Even with the other writers or less than the other writers?
less.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like if you've like I mean, it all comes down to how much you've contributed. But I feel like when it comes to like DJ acts, which are way more aggressive, and I'd say most of DJ acts don't write songs, and they want 50% of the publishing. That's a different discussion.
Yeah. And just to clarify that, oftentimes that happens with DJs because you will send a top line or a song that has one instrument under it, and then they'll produce it, and then they'll say, well, the track is 50% and the top line's 50% sometimes. Or they just try and take 50% because they're releasing the song.
And production is not songwriting.
Hey.
Ooh, spicy.
Production should be reflected. Should be reflected
You just did in the
in
reverse.
That's another panel.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, but then, because we were talking about this earlier when it was the four of us making sure we had enough to talk about when we came up here. And we started talking about these situations where, especially in the past, and especially like the bigger the artist gets, even if they haven't even touched the song, they will want to be cut in on the publishing. Oftentimes, quite a lot. Yeah. Sometimes equal with the other writers, sometimes more. You were mentioning there's a pushback to this going on in the UK.
Yeah.
Because this has been common, right? Like this happens. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, I want superstar A to release the song. He, she, or they want 40%.
Yeah.
Well, do you want a superstar cut or don't you?
Yeah.
Give them 40% and then deal with it. But
Yeah.
how's that changing?
Definitely in the UK, that feels like it's more of a, on the writer's side, there's definitely more of a pushback where artists haven't contributed anything, no changes other than they've added their vocal to the song. There's definitely, shift in conversation of late, as we were talking earlier about how there was the potential and the beginnings of a conversation in the UK to kind of start exploring whether songwriters should be given some of the master share. But that conversation feels still quite a long way off being something that everybody in the UK is comfortable with. And so the songwriting community have kind of really realized this, and then I guess everyone's just kind of clicked and gone, well, why are we giving away publishing to people that haven't contributed to the writing of the song in any capacity? I think especially as well, there's, lots of dance music in the UK. Those producers aren't writing those top lines and they aren't vocaling those songs. And definitely the last few years where there's more dance music on radio again, it's such a tricky part of the conversation. But
I got a question. So, for in the UK, since who are the people which are the ones which are standing hold on that, on saying that we have to stop that? Because if you're an up and coming songwriter and suddenly Beyonce has I want that song, but I need 40% of the song and she hasn't done anything on it. If you're like unknown and you haven't done any cuts or anything like internationally, and you have Beyonce certainly one in your song, that's pretty hard to say no to. So is it the people which are like kind of saying back on that, are the ones which are like successful, or are they the ones which are the?
It's actually quite a spread now. I think maybe a couple of years ago it was the people that kind of have a bit more of that luxury to be able to say,
yes or no.
Actually, that's, we don't perceive that as fair. But now kind of the younger writers that are coming through are also kind of finding their voice and finding that community. And it's a small community of people that are having these conversations and going to the studio and saying, well, I pushed back on this and I said, I don't think we should be giving away X amount of our publishing for somebody that hasn't contributed. So I think the conversation's happening kind of across the songwriting circle, but you're absolutely right. You're in a different position as a newer up-and-coming artist that maybe doesn't have as many cuts. It's tricky, and again, it's case by case. If you're an up-and-coming DJ, are you as aggressive as some of the more established DJs with the publishing conversation? Maybe not. It's.
But like you said, it's always been an issue. But right now we have social media saying that we see all these campaigns saying that we have to stand a hold of this.
Yeah, there's more solidarity now.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's difficult to do this alone and say, I'm gonna stand against Beyonce. Yeah. But if you're like 50 people, we're like, no, F Beyonce, we don't want that. No, F Beyonce.
No. We love Beyonce.
They're filming.
Don't get that on film. Can you censor this out? Career done.
Yeah.
Production isn't writing, and F Beyonce. We got 8 minutes left. Let's see what else we can.
Who else we can upset?
Yeah, but what was I going to say? Obviously, then for splits in an ideal world, it's fair. That was the start of your answer, which is whoever's there when the song is written are splitting it equally, and if other people come in after and they do something, talk about it, hopefully it's fair. Try not to give in to people strong-arming, I guess, as best you can. I mean, I don't think obviously it's easy to sit here and say that, or say that in any studio or whatever in the moment, it happens, I guess it's more difficult.
And you still need to preserve those relationships, right? Like, if this is a DJ that is, like Holly was saying earlier, you're having multiple records with people, and you want to preserve those relationships. And I think that's the balance, and that's the kind of, if you want to get back in the studio with people, you want to have more cuts with them. It's just trying to find that sweet spot.
Mm. But splits in your world. Beat makers. This is not. We talked about this too. This is not the same as the world that the three of us operate in.
This is a completely different issue. So, I would love to say that Norway has actually had a lot of fantastic beat makers, producers, which have done things internationally. We had, Beats by Payday, which has done stuff with, 6ix9ine, and we have the Hacks from Bergen, which is done with Pop Smoke, the late Pop Smoke. And we have so many others which have done fantastic stuff, and they've done this from their bedroom. Like, they hardly have even been over to the country or met the artists at all.
And do they have publishing?
Yeah, so that's the question right now. Well, they do now. I think the closure is over here. But yeah, that's the issue, because when you're a young beat maker, all you do is you sit in your basement and you make these beats, and you pitch these beats out to these artists, and these artists take these beats. And suddenly, like 1 week later, this song is out, and you haven't even talked about the publishing. That happens a lot. And another issue is something called the loop makers. Loop makers are, the guys which make the loops, the melodies, because of these producers tend to not, either are good at the melodies, but just want to produce the beat, produce everything around the melody.
You're talking like the production hooks.
Yeah, production, yeah. And now that's becoming an issue. I'm not going to say an issue because it's an ongoing talk, that these loop makers, which have not done that much, as they say, or as they not say, but suddenly want like 50% of the publishing, because, they feel like their work in this song has been so influential to the whole song. So that has also been, had some discussions around it, twists. Some songs have not come out because of that. So it's a different way of working in there. Yeah, in the hip hop.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think that's like, I mean, I could talk about splits all day, but we don't have time. But the thing you mentioned about master points for writers, because I have that written down here, right at the bottom. I mean, so I guess everybody knows what we're talking about, but just in case, so like this would be then the same as someone cuts a song and hasn't written the song, so why should they get publishing? But often they do, so that gets flipped upside down now by songwriters, especially the ones who are really successful, that have a lot of leverage, and say, okay, well, now I want 2 points on the master. And they're saying that for obvious reasons. It's like there's more money on that side for a start, but it's also a pushback. Yeah. Like, have you done any of these? Like, how common is it for the three of you so far? I think I can say that, I won't say which ones, but I will say in the last 2.5 years, I think I've done it 4 times. Are you like 40 times, 0 times, ish, like a handful?
Like, I think I am around the same number.
Yeah. And do we think is it fair, or is it like pushback, trying to like, you know what I mean? Is this part of solidarity? Why we're doing this? Or are we doing this because?
Well, I mean, it is kind of, if you write the song, like the song is the thing that everybody likes. Like that's the thing, right? You should be. To me, writers, getting some, whatever the percentage is, that's a whole different conversation. But I definitely feel like there should be some master share for the people that have written the song on all records. But we've kind of tended to do it or opt for it where particularly in dance space, where there's a sample in the production, which means the original sample owners have taken pretty much most of the publishing. So the rest of the writers on the song are maybe coming away with like 2 or 3% publishing on a song that they've completely written. So they're not even getting publishing on a song that they've written. So we've opted for asking for master share. That's not common.
Yeah, I mean, the one tricky thing about trying to get master points, not on all deals, but major label artists for sure, then the question is like, where do the master points come from?
Yeah.
Because obviously there's 100% of a master, and what does that get split? Let's just say 80-20, label artist for the sake of conversation. And maybe the label will give away an extra 4 to the producer, and then if the songwriters come along and say, okay, well, we want 2, then that usually comes out of the artist's 20 instead of the label's 76. Yeah. So then what do we do? Oh, well, just push anyways, try and get what's ours? Do we feel guilt? I don't know. I felt like guilty about that, just because I know that that's how it works. But obviously you want the people that you work with to be compensated. You know what I mean? Do you think it matters where the points come from?
Yeah, I think it should come from the label
Yeah,
side.
I mean, we all think that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think particularly in situations where the writer isn't really getting much publishing, then there's less guilt involved, from me at least.
Yeah. Okay, like 1 minute, and then I can ask if anyone has questions, or 1 minute and questions have to be done?
You can start to finish up.
Yeah, okay, because at 52 seconds it says here. But master points is actually the last point on my list. Yeah, I mean, we've been talking for like 30 minutes and a bit, trying to like get into it, and obviously these are conversation starters. Maybe it helps you to know what to search on Google later and read about. You know what I mean? Just like stuff that we've been talking about and trying to, because it's all over the internet, these things we've been talking about. There are podcasts and everything. Does anybody have, yeah, there are. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions before we go and make way for the next panel? Yes.
From an economical standpoint, which market is best to write? Is there any genres? Is like Asia the coolest place? Like money-wise, or United States?
Yeah, but you just said coolest, so we have to get rid of that word.
Hip hop.
Yeah. Where can you make the most money? Well, I mean, yeah, you're saying hip hop?
I said poppity pop.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, like, listen, the U.S. is the biggest music market in the world. I mean, surely that just has to define the answer. Yeah. But obviously, the bigger, I don't know. I think the way you need to look at what makes financial sense is not just where is the most money. It's where can you make the most money for the work that you're putting into it. Yeah, because the U.S. market is the biggest, it has the most money. But it also takes way more time and work to get in there. And especially if you're not ready, that time is wasted. Yeah. And time is money. Yeah. So I get why you're asking that question. I just think it's like, there's quite a bit of nuance there. I would say from Scandinavia anyways, what I've been focusing on personally is getting into like Central Europe via Germany first, and because then there's like a domino effect of all the countries around it. Maybe it trickles over to the UK, maybe it doesn't, and then from there, maybe then. You know what I mean? But I mean, Central Europe is bigger than the US, speaking in terms of music markets. So, I mean, Germany's not bigger than the US, but Germany and all the countries around it are.
Number 1 on radio in Germany is very
Yeah,
good
and that's
now.
the other thing. A number 1 song on radio in Germany, that's, you want that. Yeah, but like you really want that. Because the thing about Germany is there's no, now we're getting slightly off topic, but just to give some detail to the answer, there is no national broadcaster in Germany like there is in Norway, NRK, BBC. It's kind of like the States. It's totally decentralized. There's radio everywhere. You can get on the radio in the north and not in the south, and the east and not in the west kind of thing, but if you make it happen everywhere and you get like a proper, I mean, number 1, yeah, but even like a top 40 is like, bring on the cash. So yeah. Any other questions, or I feel like we need to end?
We need to end. But now it started to get really fun. But you guys will stay, and you will also. So I guess those questions can also be asked during a small break that we will have now. And then just be back in 5 minutes, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mike, Holly, Tina, Eric. Ja, jeg er på. Ok, da skal vi gjøre et forsøk på å komme videre. Det skal bli en pause til. Neste tema er flere og andre muligheter for å plassere og bruke musikk i nye sammenhenger, som å koble musikk og spill. Stine Osmo Lieng fra Musikkforleggerne har de siste 9 årene før det jobbet som creative manager i Warner Chappell og deltatt i Musikk Ut i Verden. Du fremdeles engasjert og opptatt av å finne flere muligheter og plasseringer for låtene, og spill en mulighet. Men det en god kanal, og det mer å hente? Stine skal ta med seg Arild Iversen, audio director i Funcom, og Theo Noguera, audio lead og composer i Snowcastle Games, og daglig leder i Games Audio Norway på scenen. Vær så god.
Hallo? Ja. Jeg ventet på den musikken, gleder meg veldig til å gå opp til den. Men ja, vi da her i dag for å snakke om musikk i spill. Et veldig stort tema som vi skal prøve å få gjort på 30 minutter. Så jeg tenker vi bare gå rett på. Theo, kan du introdusere deg selv?
Ja. Jeg Theo Noguera. Jeg jobber på Snowcastle Games, som en av de største spillstudio her i Norge. Og jeg audio lead og komponist. Så jeg jobber med alt som går inn i lyd og musikk i spillet, og implementerer det i spill. Og jeg også jobber med Game Audio in Norway, som var en forening vi startet i fjor, som akkurat om til å hjelpe de som jobber på spill, begge komponister og lyddesignere, og alle som går innimellom og implementerer det inn i spill. Jeg fra Brasil og bodde i USA for 20 år, før hvor jeg begge studerte og jobbet med alle disse ting. Jeg også jobbet i film og andre del av industrien. Og da flyttet jeg til Norge 5 år siden. Så da jeg her nå. Og ja.
Yes, mitt navn Arild. Jeg audio director i Funcom. Jeg skal få lov å vise noen bilder for å vise litt hva vi jobber med for tiden. Så ja, for mange kjenner kanskje til Funcom. Det et av de større spillstudioene i Skandinavia. Vi ble etablert i Oslo i 93 og har hatt en rekke internasjonale suksesser. Noen oppturer og noen nedturer, men en del kjente spill som Longest Journey, Anarchy Online, Musikk Ut og Conan og litt diverse. Som audio director så er jeg ansvarlig for visjon, gjennomførelse av visjon med mitt eget team, jobber med eksterne komponister, lisensiering og teknisk implementasjon. Litt som en lydingeniør også, men i det siste så har vi fått en ny IP vi jobber med. Vi har fått alle rettighetene til å jobbe med den IP-en fra Legendary Studios, som Dune, i sammenheng med filmene som kommer ut, og Denis Villeneuve. Det veldig stort for oss, og vi veldig spent på hva det blir ut av det. Funcom også publisher. Vi publiserer spill for andre studioer i Europa. Vi har et spill som fransk, som skal bruke denne IP-en. Der benytter vi den danske komponisten Jesper Kid, som en etablert komponist. Ganske typisk for industrien å gjøre sånt, å bruke komponister. Det står 4X, men det visst nok spillsjangeren. Jeg henger ikke alltid med på alt. Det Shiro Games. Vi jobber også med et selskap i Stockholm som heter Outsiders, der vi jobber med et slags rytme-action-skytespill, litt type operatisk heavy metal for de som måtte like sånt. Ganske komplisert greie. De som ansvarlig for musikk og lisensiering et lite selskap som heter Two Feathers i Stockholm. De 2 stykk, og de komponerer og hyrer inn vokalister som de ønsker å jobbe med. De komponerer musikken selv, musikken ikke direkte lisensiert. Svensker veldig flinke, og det veldig kult for oss å jobbe med de og være med å være publisher. Funcom har ansvar for finansiering, marketing, legal stuff og så videre. Så det ganske stort. Og vi selv i gang med et meget stort Dune-spill som vil ta noen år. Vi jobber opp til 200 på prosjektet akkurat nå, og blir kanskje 300-400, og det tar flere år å gjøre ferdig. Så Der skal vi jobbe med komponist og muligens noe lisensiering. Så med det så går vi tilbake hit.
Ja, så jeg tenker vi må kanskje starte å kartlegge litt dette med hvor det rom for musikk i et spill? Hvordan det dere på en måte, hvor kan man plassere musikk? Hvordan man skiller det?
Ja, det stort sett gjennom marketing man gjerne lisensierer samtidskomponister, eller artister mener jeg, popmusikk, diverse. Det kan også gjøres gjennom spillet i selve spillet, men det litt mer komplisert prosess. Det avhenger av hvilke behov vi har i produktene våre, og tid og andre utfordringer vi har.
Ja, på min side akkurat nå vi jobber på et spill som har vært annonsert, det kalles Iconay Island. Og på dette spillet vi har noe som bare ikke annonsert nå, men vi jobber med en artist som vi fikk kontakt i fjor. Og hun, jeg kan ikke si hvem det nå, fordi det skal komme neste uke. Men hun jobbet med meg, og hun laget låter direkte for dette spillet. Så vi jobbet sammen med teksten og hvordan det skal bli en del av et spill. Dette spillet spesifikt fordi spillet vår på vår egen verden, og alt må være på en måte en del av den. Så hele sangen basert på dette spillet. Men på en måte, det en sang. Problemet med å lage musikk for et spill at du må ha den på en plass i et spill som det skal funke og alltid gå videre og ikke stoppe. Eller det må være på en plass som det skal ha for eksempel du har en del av spill som bare en kort scene som går og ferdig som en film for eksempel. Og det en måte å ha det, men inn i spillet som vi kaller in-game, den litt mer vanskelig, og det mye mer implementasjon som går inn i den. Så for den artistens sangen, vi har 2 versjoner av sangen som jeg lager med henne. En som skal gå i en credits, og den andre, den som alle teksten og alt, på denne som går på en credits. Og den andre en som jeg jobbet med, som mer instrumentalt, og det mange forskjellige versjoner som går i loop, så du blir ikke lei av det å høre så mange ganger hvis du inne i den del av spillet. Så det 2 veier, og den tredje veien hva jeg gjør som komponist og andre komponister som jobber med andre spill, at du lager musikk direkte til spill, så du må tenke på mye om implementasjon, hvordan skal musikk utvikle inn i spillet og bytte når du på forskjellige nivå, du på forskjellige rom, eller noen som forskjellig som skjer inn i spillet. Så det mye ting du må tenke på når du kommer på det. Ja.
Ja, fordi det jo litt greit at man deler opp det, fordi det jo den egenkomponerte musikken til spillet, som vi fant ut vi kunne sånn nesten kalle soundtrack, men samtidig ikke. Men for enkelhetens skyld, la oss kalle det soundtracket. Og så det jo da dette med musikk som allerede eksisterer fra før av, som man kan klassifisere som en synk inn i spillet. Og det jo 2 veldig sånn vidt forskjellige veier inn i spillet. Men altså, hvis man ønsker å få musikk, altså synk inn i spill, hvem det man kontakter? Hvem på en måte music supervisoren? Hvem skal man huke tak i?
Ja, altså, det går gjerne litt på først går det på hva behov vi har, og så går det på gjerne etablert nettverk selvfølgelig, hvem man kjenner og så videre. Det ofte litt lite tid, økonomiske utfordringer, så vi velger gjerne litt de beste utveiene vi har, enkleste som å jobbe med komponist. Men det også blitt mer og mer vanlig å jobbe med lisensiering av musikk da, selvfølgelig, utifra hvilken type produkt det Så, men ja, det går gjennom litt networking, rett og slett, hvem man liker å jobbe med og så videre.
Ja, jeg tror også det alltid du må sjekke hva studio har, hvor stor studio det noen studier som vi snakker om som har kanskje 50 som jobber bare til lisensiere musikk, som for GTA 5 for eksempel. Men da har du mindre spillerstudio som hvor jeg den eneste lydmusikkperson. Så hvis du vil sjekke med noe som på en smalere studio, da må du snakke med noe som jobber hva jeg gjør, eller hva Arild gjør. Fordi da vi har ikke en music supervisor i studio, eller vi har ikke en som ansvarlig akkurat for det. Men selvfølgelig noen ganger vi også får referanser fra noen annen i bedriften som kjenner, jeg hørte den sangen fra den artisten, og det veldig fin, kan du ta det inn i spillet. Så selvfølgelig, det kan komme fra mange sider.
Så det dere to folk skal spandere øl på etterpå. Det var det, ja. Ja, men det bra. Tenker vi jo litt med hvordan man samarbeider, musikkbransjen med spillbransjen. Det veldig, du sier at det går veldig på nettverk, men hvor på en måte bredt det nettverket? Dere stadig på utkikk etter nye samarbeidspartnere, eller det litt sånn at man bruker de man har?
Ja, altså vi burde jo kanskje være med på utkikk etter samarbeidspartnere. Bransjen ganske konservativ. Man jobber typisk med komponist, fordi å jobbe med å lisensiere musikk til spill komplisert noen ganger. Og det en del utfordringer der. Så vi jobber typisk med en buyout med komponist, og så jobber vi med payroll for soundtrack-utgivelser. Lisensiering av artister burde jo kanskje noe vi burde begynne å satse litt mer på. Det kommer helt an på.
Ja, for det som du sier, at det en veldig tidskrevende prosess, og hvis man ikke har en music supervisor på teamet fra før som kjenner til hele denne prosessen med hvor man skal gå frem for å klarere musikk, så blir det litt vanskelig. Ja, så har de store selskapene som jobber gjerne med det som kalles Grand Theft Auto og diverse, der de har veldig kjente artister, og da har de gjerne egne store lisensieringsavdelinger. Men man må jo begynne et sted.
Ja, det kan bli veldig komplisert, og det kan også ta tid, som du sa, og også, det mange ganger en utfordring for oss, fordi noen ganger vi har ikke så mye tid, vi har bare en måned til å ha den allerede inne i spillet, og mange ganger ting kom til slutt, når vi nesten ferdig, og da vi må ha det akkurat nå. Hvis vi har ikke det, må vi finne en annen som vi kan bruke i stedet.
Samme som filmbransjen, med andre ord.
Ja, på en måte, ja. Men rettigheter i spill mye vanskeligere enn i film. Og bare til å si det, så det litt bedre forstått, at i spillet, de som betaler for alle royalties i spillstudio, så det veldig forskjellig. Vi har ikke en distributør som det i filmbransjen, og det den som blir veldig komplisert av hvordan spillstudio skal jobbe med det.
Ja, det vel litt det at den modellen som allerede eksisterer kan ikke implementeres inn i klarering til spill, fordi den passer ikke inn. Nei. Så det jo noe som vi som bransje må jobbe tettere med dere på å finne en enklere måte å samarbeide på. Og da det kanskje lettere å kunne begynne å bruke originalmusikk, eller det å synke musikk til spill kan bli lettere for alle parter. Men har dere noen tips til, det kan godt hende det sitter noen låtskrivere her som har veldig lyst til å begynne å skrive musikk til spill? Om dere har noen tips, for jeg måtte jo se en dokumentar selvfølgelig i forkant av det her, og da var det der med bars. Det liksom fortsatt, om dere kan si litt om det?
Ja, så kan jeg...
Skremme folk det.
Nei, jeg tror først det veldig viktig at det på en måte stems av sangen i den, fordi noen ganger vi må, så hvis du har forskjellige layers av sangen din som vi kan bruke i stedet av hele sangen, så vi kan lage forskjellige loops, så det blir ikke alltid samme. Men at ting veldig tett på tempo veldig viktig, og at vi vet hva BPM og hva time signature av sangen din, det veldig viktig, fordi vi må ta alt på den tempo, og alt skal funke sammen. Det jeg tror kanskje den viktigste del av å ha musikk i spill. Har du noe annet?
Nei, altså først, man bør jo kanskje begynne å nettverke i disse spillkonferansene, møte opp, bli kjent med bransjen. Du har typisk indie-bransjen, og så har du i Norge så har du Funcom som den gamle tanten, som litt vanskeligere å jobbe med. Så vi ikke så enkle alltid, men det masse muligheter, og de tekniske tingene det typisk vi som løser sammen med musikere, så det ikke noe man burde bekymre seg for. Men musikken I spill skal oppleves sømløst. Da. Så da, såkalt adaptiv musikk, så da blir det et tett samarbeid på å løse de tekniske delene av komposisjonen. Ellers marketing gjerne den beste måten å komme I gang på. Gjennom labels, publishers, og bransjen må promotere og ta kontakt.
Ja, for det var det jeg spurte dere om da første praten var. At bare hvor ofte dere på en måte... Altså, hvor ofte tar labels, management, publishere og sånn kontakt med dere? Og svaret?
Sjelden.
Veldig sjeldent.
Noen flink.
Og det synes jeg var litt overraskende. Men så tenker jeg på et av de spørsmålene vi skulle få her, det hvordan kan man samarbeide bedre? Og der det veldig, veldig mange muligheter. Så først og fremst som sier, at man skal sette seg litt inn I hvordan det funker å dra på disse spillkonferansene. Og bygge nettverk på tvers, så har vi kanskje kommet ganske langt.
Ja, jeg tror det mange forskjellige arrangementer som skjer. Vi I Gain skal ha vår egen konferanse igjen. Vi hadde I fjor, I desember. Vi skal få det igjen I september, som heter GAKO. Og jeg her I Oslo, og også på livestream. Men det akkurat den type ting, og vi har spillkonvent som kommer også nå I juni, men jeg tror den allerede sold out. På den jeg skal snakke om I panel med Tono og med Sara fra Sony akkurat om rettigheter av musikk til spill. Jeg tror disse type konferanser en veldig god måte å møte oss I spillbransjen, så vi kan også det veldig viktig at I spillbransjen det mye ting vi kan gjøre, det mye frihet om hvor mye vi kan bytte ting og vi kan ta sangen og bruke på en ting, men I morgen kan vi bruke på noe annet, og alt kan bli veldig forskjell. Så det veldig viktig at dere kan snakke med oss om hva du har, hva ideer dere har, og hvordan kan det komme inn til å bli en del av hva vi gjør.
Jeg lurer litt på om vi skal sette I gang litt spørsmål, for jeg tenker nå har vi først 2 her som kan svare på alt med spill og musikk. Så om det noen spørsmål I salen, som jeg håper det Nei, det var det så tydelig. Ja, der
Det et spørsmål som går litt sånn overlatt mellom dette panelet og forrige, for det, altså I begynnelsen av lydfilmens historie så var det veldig vanlig med sync-briefs, hvor det skulle være vertikal integrering, sånn som Warner Brothers, som prøvde å bruke egen katalog, og hadde brief som skulle underbygge egne artister og så videre. Hvordan det med eierskap I spillbransjen? Det noen av de store som også har eierandeler I spillbransjen, og I så fall får dere briefer hvor dere skal prøve å støtte opp under katalogen og den type ting der? Eller det helt forskjellige eierskapsstrukturer?
I USA det vanlig. Der de store selskapene og der de har de store samarbeidene, spesielt Universal en del samarbeid mellom spillbransjen. Du ser disse spillene som mange spiller Fortnite og andre ting. Der det utplassering av musikk, og som skal promoteres gjennom spillet. Store penger der. Vi ikke helt der da, for å si det sånn.
Ja.
Ja. Sikkert. Ja. Vi vil samarbeide med alle som vil. Det en del av hvorfor vi startet den foreningen, og det at å bli... Fordi det var ingen... I begynnelsen, vi var en gruppe som har vært her for lenge siden. Det har vært startet med 4 som, og jeg tror Arild var også på begynnelsen, det var bare en Facebook-gruppe til begynnelsen, som har vokst mye, og vi over 350, som veldig mye for bare spill, lyd og musikk. Og akkurat nå, du kan bare se på nettsiden vår, så gainnorway.com, og der alle detaljer om hvem vi hva vi gjør, hva vi holder på, og også hvor kan du bli medlem. Og hvis du vil samarbeide, du kan alltid snakke med noen av oss I styret, alle oss har samme ansvar, og vi jobber sammen hele tiden. Og vi veldig interessert I å jobbe med andre, og se hvordan vi kan hjelpe hverandre til å vokse. Så, ja.
Jeg håper alle skjønner at det et vanvittig potensial for musikk i spill. Det bare at man må, vi sammen som bransje må tilrettelegge mer for at det blir lettere, og så må vi tørre å sparke inn litt dører på disse konferansene, og synliggjøre oss, og så tørre å prate sammen.
Ja, og en annen ting jeg skulle si, det mange vet ikke om det, men spillindustri en av de største kulturelle industri i verden, og vi 80 ganger større enn musikkbransjen, 80 ganger større enn filmbransjen i verden. Så bare i fjor det var 178 milliarder av dollar som var i spillindustri. I motsatt, i musikkbransjen 25. Så det en veldig stor forskjell.
Det bare å dra på spillkonferanse, folkens. Det noen flere spørsmål? Jeg tror vi rekker et til. Ja.
For all del, da det bare å ta kontakt og få det diskutert. Det jo kjempespennende. Vi har gjerne etablerte kanaler og ting som man gjerne allerede planlegger, men ja, absolutt. Det mulig.
Ja. Tenker jeg vi sier takk for oss. Ja.
Takk, Stine, Arild, Theo. Jeg sikker på at dere blir superpopulære utover kvelden, så ikke dra med det aller første. Bare gi oss nordmenn en øl først, så tror jeg at det løser seg det her nye samarbeidet med spillbransjen. Norge har solide produksjonsmiljø og studio med veldig gode fasiliteter. Vi har kunnskap og kompetanse, både om å spille musikk og hvordan du skal gjøre det i et studio og produsere den. Alt det her etterspørses internasjonalt. Vi har rett og slett veldig gode forutsetninger for at kreative samarbeid og produksjoner skal skje her hjemme. Og musikkstudioene fungerer jo også ofte som et nav for musikkmiljøer rundt om i hele landet. Her møtes artister, låtskrivere, musikere, produsenter, studioteknikere, talentspeidere og hele bransjen. Vi har noen sånne produksjonsmiljø i landet. Vi får flere og flere. Det har vært veldig fint å ha noen av dem med i Musikk Ut i Verden. Terje fra Ocean Sound Recordings på Giske utenfor Ålesund, og Geir Luedi, CEO i Made Management, begge deltakere i Musikk Ut i Verden, ekstremt opptatt av god lyd og å lage gode miljø. And so is Rob Byrne, founder of 1087 Studios, which is a series of community spaces for musical creators in London and home to over 150 audio professionals. And we will have a conversation just about this, so please join me on stage, Terje, Geir and Rob. Terje Erstad.
Yes.
Ocean Sound is a destination studio everyone has heard of. And actually 50% of all your clients are international. Why are they coming to Giske, small island outside Ålesund? How do they find you? Why do they come there?
Isn't that obvious? No, no, I think there are different reasons, but when we built the studio, it's a purpose-made studio, and when we built the studio, we wanted it to be a good studio. So if we moved Ocean Sound to Oslo or to London or to Tokyo, we want it to be like considered a good studio. So that's the main thing. And then we have this, what can I call it, an X factor, that we have the Atlantic Ocean literally 5 meters from the studio. We have this Sunnmøre nature around us, and I also hope we have some good people working there. So, and it's really easy to get there. There's an airport 50 minutes drive from the studio. The giant city Ålesund is 50 minutes drive from the studio. So you're kind of at the end of the world, but it's still easy to get there.
And during Musikk Ut i Verden, you have grown your international network. How important are international clients to you and the studio?
They're very important. So we do now have approximately 50% international acts coming in, and the rest is Norwegian. And there's a lot of cool stuff from Norway, and it's really fun to work with Norwegian artists, but the market is smaller, and the rest of the world is bigger than Norway. So for us, it's really important to have people coming in, and it's also inspiring for us to actually, of course, it's cool to work with local artists like Sigrid, for example, and the local choir and stuff like that. That's super cool, but it's also inspiring to get people in from like Japan or India or the US, Sweden, and I see some local guys here that I hope one day will go the other way out. Yeah.
Which is your bigger international client?
The biggest? Probably Arcade Fire or Swedish House Mafia. Sigrid. I consider her as an international client now. And yeah. Contra K, the German gangster rapper. He's probably like the biggest right now. Every German speaking countries have him like on top on every list. So.
And no one here knows him yet.
No. And he bought a lion when he was in the studio last time. He actually bought a lion. So he's a cool, like gangster guy. So yeah, and that's true. He did.
A living lion?
Yeah, a living lion.
But not from Giske?
No. What are you doing? Buying a lion. So yeah.
Geir Luedi, you started also in a studio yourself. You are today the manager of Aurora, Sigrid, CEO in Made in Bergen. How important have your experience from the studio been in your quite now impressive career as a music manager?
I don't feel the difference that much being a manager and a producer. I don't touch it anymore. But there's a lot of different types of managers. Some are lawyers, and some are former musicians. And is that my fault? No. So I know, but yeah. So as a manager, I'm very focused on the product. That's kind of what I try to do. So, especially in the beginning with Aurora, I was deeply into that vibe, going in and out of the studio and giving feedback, and sometimes they wanted to hear.
So then, as a producer, you can be very helpful in developing artists at an early stage.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, when I was a producer, I used to think that, okay, we have a manager coming in today. Another, he's a douchebag. And now I know what they think when I get in there. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's all about music. So, and the studio is where it happens. And hopefully quality won't, die.
You now, obviously, you know Bergen, you know your local community quite well, and you have insight into that, both environment, the next talents, and that you can also connect now with the international network that you have grown over time. And do you think that you know how, as an experience, play a role? Your background play a role when you present new artists international?
I don't know. Maybe, yeah. Like my experience as a producer, if that has helped me. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of things I don't know about running a management, being a manager, but I've been doing music for 30 years, and most of that time in a studio. And a lot of A&R people out there don't know so much about music. you know, that's rude to say, but it's kind of true. So maybe I can be helpful sometimes. Sounds like very arrogant from Bergen. Sorry.
No, but I remember but being in a studio and, you know, being in the music industry for so many years, you come into a studio and you know that the artist, they have like made this song, they play you that song, it lasts 3 minutes, they want to hear what you think about it. And the only thing that I can think about is the artist is expecting me to say something clever and I don't have a clue about what to say. So I think but would you maybe suggest that we got more experience or went into the studio as manager or coming from different scenes in the industry, that we actually are in the studio more often?
Well, yeah, if you have something to do there.
Okay.
I mean, the managers that comes from the lawyer side, they would probably, you know, hire somebody to be more helpful on the A&R side. The same way I have to hire very expensive lawyers to do my contracts. So, but I mean, it's a big team, record company and management and publishing, and we all want the same, and we all work to get to, you know, a really good product. So anybody who can help should be shouting out.
Rob Byrne from 1087 Studios. Welcome from London.
Thank you.
You founded 1087 in 2013 out of a very personal need. What did you want to create and why?
So in 2013, I was working as a producer. I was in and out of you know, lots of the rooms in London that producers are in and out of. And I had my own room myself, my own kind of private space that I rented monthly. And, you know, it's an expensive kind of business, and really my own room wasn't fit for purpose. That was the issue. And I had a sort of network of other artists and producers that were in the same position, that needed somewhere functional that they could call home, you know, where they could share equipment, where they could share their contacts and grow their careers. So that was really the drive behind starting the business.
Because today, I read on your web page that 1087 is a world-class recording studio community.
Yes.
So how important is this community?
I mean,
what is that? How do you facilitate for that?
I feel like the word's been kind of killed since COVID. everyone has used community, but I mean, genuinely speaking, I think we're one of the largest clusters of recording studios in the UK. So I think we're kind of justified in our use of the word. But yeah, no, I think it. You know, what we're doing is essential for the UK. You know, musical ecosystem, and you know, buildings and spaces like ours are really important for cities. You know.
So what do you think the studio needs to offer in 2022?
I mean, I think that, you know, studios will kind of always cater to a need, and I think, you know, that's the amazing thing about them, is that they're you know, normally sort of profit-generating enterprises. So, you know, personally, I think that studios should be filling the gaps between the project studios. Commercial studios should be filling the gaps between project studios. So, you know, stuff that you can't do in your small studio, you know, that needs to be catered for in a bigger space. Recording an orchestra, recording a band, you know, multi-tracking a band live. But I think the most important thing for studios generally, not just in 22 but always, is vibe. You know, like the best studios I walked into, it's just you get in the room and it's just like you want to play something through the speakers, or you want to play the piano, you know. So yeah, that's probably.
How often does the manager comes to the studio?
I mean, it depends on who's in the studio. If it's a band, then yeah, probably the manager will come. But yeah, it can be really helpful, and not sometimes.
Geir, Bergen has a reputation being a city you go to for record music. And you started your career in Sigma Studios, in legendary Sigma Studios in Bergen. This was a few years ago, and the studio space was maybe the only place to record music. But now we have a lot of these bedroom producers, coming out from the bedrooms, putting their songs online. How important do you think it is to have an access to a real physical studio place these days? How is it important with those facilities?
Yes, if you want to make a really good recording, that's important. I mean, in the 90s, when the laptops came around, a lot of studios went down because people started recording. And I remember I was trying to fix a lot of those recordings, and they were really bad. And it felt like, why am I doing this? Like, why didn't they do it properly? But it was cheap. I mean, we have 50 to 100,000 songs coming out every day now. So a lot of it doesn't sound really good. But when you look at, not the top lists, but the quality won't get out of fashion, We need that. We need quality.
But obviously, you speak for the sound in the room. But for the artists today, when they release their songs, maybe from the bedrooms, but also use like platforms like TikTok, and the fans, they listen to their music through their like crappy cell phones. How important is the sound for the artists today?
I mean, even though there's a lot of people listening to music from lousy speakers, it's like when you work on a picture on Photoshop, you won't be drawing in a picture like this. You need it to be this, so you can really, and then you can look at it when it's small. So it doesn't really matter how people listen to it, and if they want to listen to it on good speakers, then it sounds good. So I think. And a lot of people still wants to listen to music on good speakers, or people buy very expensive headphones as well these days. And those who wants to listen to music through that speaker, they can do that.
Because the technology has development is going fast also in the studio business, and the Dolby Atmos sound format is a good example. And something that you, Terje, also explored during the Musikk Ut Verden program. What significance can this development have for the Norwegian studio, do you think?
From our perspective, we're a destination studio, and the last 2 years we couldn't travel. So why have a destination studio when no one can come visiting you? So we need to find out, okay, we need another way to make business and make people come to us without physically coming. So then we looked at Atmos, always heard about this new formats coming, and some of them are like really good, but ends up only being for like the geeks. Like you remember the laser disc and the surround thing you had in your living room, and it's cool, but it didn't it didn't end up as a success. But Dolby Atmos is now, you can, like the new AirPods are Dolby Atmos. In new cars you can listen in the Dolby Atmos format. So we decided to go like all in Dolby Atmos. We contacted the Dolby company, and they came to us and calibrated the studio. Like it's our Studio B. So now it's like Dolby we got this certification. So now people can come to us, get their best badass mixes without actually traveling to us. So we want to do like international business without people traveling across the borders. So yeah, for us this was like a crucial thing, because we need more, how do you say it in English, like more legs to stand on, not like only one. So yeah, Nils Arne again. Yeah, but so for us, this Dolby decision that we made that okay, we're going to go all in on this. I think that was a crucial thing to decide for us.
Rob, you have, we talked about a solid, long background and experience as a sound engineer and producer, but today you call yourself a social entrepreneur. Tell me a little bit about your vision for the future studio or future recording space.
Yeah, I mean, when I started in the studio, I was focusing on my career, but I sort of quite quickly, from running 1087, realized that, especially in London, that there was a real, sort of need for these kind of spaces. And I remember I ended up reading about this this building in New York in the 1950s called the Brill Building, and it was this place that you could go as a musician. You could go with a song, play it to a publisher, play it to a label, get signed, record it in a studio, and come out with the record on the same day. And, I think we've kind of regressed a little bit in the music industry. Like, those kind of spaces don't exist anymore, but I really passionately believe that our kind of spaces are essential in cities worldwide. So, for us, the next step is South London, and we're looking at a building there for the community, for the music community there. So that's the kind of vision.
And so you grow a space which is a very local community. Yeah. And so that's maybe also the key for how you can grow and expand.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the spaces, we try to sort of keep quite an open network with what we're doing. So it's not just as, we're creating like a closed community where we're trying to find the local businesses and local music industry. For instance, in South London at the moment, there's an incredible movement in jazz and new jazz. There's artists like, Nubia Garcia, Tom Misch, Yusuf Days, and they've got this incredible scene going, but there's just a real lack of facilities, So, and I'm sure it's the same here in Norway. It's, you've got incredible music being made here, so it's important that you have the facilities.
And you obviously invested quite a bit yourself in this, but how have you invested in and to making?
Well, so far, actually, we're 100% publicly funded. So all of the funding for all of our complexes so far has come from either the Arts Council in the UK, local authorities, or the government. So I actually haven't invested in the business myself, but they're usually loans, and we pay them back just like we would a bank, basically. So.
Yeah, because you said something about this guarantee loan that you can get. So it's not a fund; you actually have to pay back.
Yeah. You pay it back. It's not. I didn't have a big bank account and came in, and it's grassroots from the ground up. So yeah, maybe a bit different to some stories. But.
If you should grow studio or recording facilities here in Norway, what would you need to get into the next phase, Terje?
First of all, I think you need to find like an idea. So your studio, your business is like going without any like funding and stuff like that. But I think the funding can be a really good inspiration, and you get recognized and motivated, and also let you have this room to work in, that so you can go out, meet people, and actually travel out and get new connections. And for us, that was this Musikk Ut Verden was really, really important for us that way, because I think studios, if you go to conferences like Bylarm or Music Biz, or people forget about the studios. Studios is like super important for the process from the songs being made, being released, everything that happens in between there, or much of the things that happens in between there happens in the studio. But I don't think people talk enough about studios. Do you agree, Bjarte? He's a
so there is a lot of industry learning also going on in the studio. You can You can train yourself in a little bit and educate maybe yourself a little bit in how actually the music business is on the inside when you are in a studio. But from all the hours that you have spent in a studio, not together, still, I think. You're not a band.
Cool though.
And all the artists and industry players you have seen unfold in a recording space, I hope that you can, the last minute, share some do's and don'ts. Guide your best advice for a young, aspiring artist today.
Oh. You want to start?
I mean, it's maybe a bit obvious, but I think that the most successful artists and producers that I've seen kind of start, and then sort of go on to something big, they've all had a kind of grit, like a determination. But actually at the same time, I think another thing is maybe, because you can have that and it maybe, you never finish a song, you never, sort of progress to the point of actually having material to send to the labels or the A&Rs or whatever. So I think actually finishing demos, getting stuff to a place that is, that is listenable, like that combination, I think would be my sort of tip for, aspiring people.
Take feedback from managers.
Yeah.
No, but take feedback, because very often I hear stuff and people want to release stuff way too early. It's not good enough. You're competing with 50,000 other songs that day. So maybe you could do better. Maybe you could do more unique stuff and work on, like, what is special about this? And take a few rounds, because almost every artist is talking about, I want this song out next week. Like, it's why? They have this urge to just put it out, but have a plan and take feedback.
Terje, do you give any feedback in the studio, or as also as a studio manager, when do you interfere and when do you definitely not interfere with what's going on in the studio?
If you have like Sade in the studio and you can like smell the røykelse and she's doing yoga, then you won't go into the studio. But if you have like Swedish House Mafia there and they, Terje, can you take us out cod fishing? We need a guitar player who plays like Jimi Hendrix. Can you fix that for us? Then if there's a session like that going on, you're kind of involved all the time. But other artists comes to the studio just to be all by themselves, alone, this remote island. So then you need some people skills. So, but you can feel this when you first meet the people. You can say, okay, this is probably going to be a session where I'm going to be involved a lot or not at all. So.
You started a music competition a few years back, Musikkprisen. One of the bands that participated in the final is here today. And that music prize has also launched a few Norwegian careers, actually. Was that maybe not a plan to like also promote the studio, but because something that you in is actually recording in the studio. But has that also been important for you, to grow not your business, but maybe also your visions outside the studio?
We have this year. I think we have 50 different bands and artists sending in their songs to us, and these guys went to the final. One out of 3 bands in the final, and for us, it's really. It might sound like I'm lying, but for us, there's not much money in it, but it's like really inspiring to pick up young, talented artists and make them come up and do their thing. And when you win this competition, you get 1 week studio time with an engineer or producer, and we play at Jugendfest, which is a festival we also run with 15,000 people in the crowd, and you get to play on Trondheim Calling. So I think this is really like inspiring for the artists. And we had some bands. Have you heard of a band called High as a Kite? yeah, they never done anything before. They just recorded like a demo song and sent it into the competition, and they won. And the first recording they did was the studio time they won when they won the competition. So, and this is really inspiring for us to work with these artists and make them a career for them, kind of a start of a career.
Yeah, and with your presence in the music industry, all of you, you of course you meet a lot of new talent, and maybe also a lot of new talent seek your attention. What your final question for today? What gets your attention today? Rob, who would you like to include in your community?
I mean, I think
producers, songwriters. Is it talents? Is it?
There's, I mean, I think in terms of like up and coming artists, it's often, it's often like a sort of personal touch, something that's sort of, you know, that differentiates the person away from the crowd. Someone that's pushing the envelope and being a bit different, often is the kind of key. But yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about you guys, but.
Geir.
Yeah, same. Something fresh, new, different. Right now I'm listening to a rapper that sings in Icelandic. That's going to be a tough one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
We need some fresh air, people, so let's take a short break and see you in 10 minutes here. Hei. Da vi klar for dagens siste session. Dere er sikkert litt utålmodige, sånn som jeg akkurat nå, på at barn skal åpne. Men jeg kan love deg at det skal den, og at det finnes Musikk Norge-ansatte med bonger i lomma. Så finn en sånn. En Musikk Norge-medarbeider, altså. We will end really futuristic. We will look into how artificial intelligence influence on future song and songwriter opportunities. We have Ankit Desai, founder of Snafu Records, that does exactly this, using AI to identify undervalued artists and tracks that needs amplifying to find a bigger audience. Here, in conversation with Ben Blackburn, former A&R at Atlantic Records in UK, and now the very busy and successful manager of Girl in Red. Guys, take it away.
Great. Is this working? Fantastic.
Is this working? Yeah, it's working.
Great. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Thank you for hanging on. We're very aware of the fact it's only us that stand between you and a party. So we will try and make it as interesting as we can for the next 30 or so minutes. I guess before we get into the talk, we can do an introduction, I guess. So obviously I'm Ben. I manage a Norwegian artist called Girl in Red, who you may or may not be familiar with, along with another sort of smaller roster of other artists. And prior to that, I used to work in A&R at major labels in the UK. And both of those roles have led me to learn a lot about technology and music, and obviously how its application is used separately. And with me, we have...
My name is Ankit. Hey, everyone. I'm the founder and CEO at Snafu Records. And what we do is we call ourselves the world's first AI-enabled record label. So we basically use AI algorithms to find artists that are, let's say, undervalued, but also underappreciated, that we feel could reach a bigger audience. And before that, I spent a few years working for Universal Music here in the Nordics first, and then in the US, before getting tired of the whole major label space and saying, how hard could it be to do it ourselves? It was very hard. But yeah, that's a very short background on myself.
Great. Well, I think it's important to kind of frame the conversation we're going to have, because obviously music and technology are huge terms and themes. And technology in of itself is constantly evolving and changing in the sphere of music to the point where I'm sure even in half an hour what we've said may be totally irrelevant. But where we found ourselves is technology consuming music in a way that it never has before. You know, historically in music, or the industry, technology would mostly find itself in two places, I guess. It would be the music creation, you know, studios and the technology that goes into equipment and creation, and the format, you know, vinyl through to cassette, through to CD, etc. Those were the two main hubs. But with the advent of the internet, that obviously completely exponentially increased the relationship technology has with music and obviously so many other things. And that originally found itself obviously in piracy, with Napster and LimeWire, and that caused a huge upset in an industry that had been fairly insulated prior to that point, some would say perhaps too much, and caused a whole conversation and much more about audience and product, or audience and artist, audience and idea, and that then led to streaming services as sort of an attempt to try and move back from piracy and re-monetize the industry, but in a way that was far more fairer and representative to consumer demand. And with streaming, obviously, now we have access to so much more data and so much more understanding of the music itself, of audiences, of audience interaction. And it's interesting for me personally to see how that is transpiring in a very practical sense, you know, with the services themselves, the way they try and relay that information to artists, Spotify for artists, Apple Music for artists, the way that the creator is being so much more empowered now to actually understand the information that's being presented to them and how it can benefit them. But it's also still a relatively mystifying subject, especially if you're using like the word artificial intelligence. And
absolutely,
I think to an extent as well, there's probably going to be a group of people who are perhaps a little bit perturbed or worried about the way data enters music. Because I think romantically, historically, we look at music, rightly so, as a very subjective thing, something that requires emotion and sort of ideology and experience, which themselves aren't necessarily very data-driven, you know?
Absolutely.
So it's important to look at these and examine technology instead of just accepting that it is a good thing by virtue of the fact it's new and exciting, but to understand if it really is, and if so, how. So with that in mind, going back to your company, I'm kind of keen to know a little bit more about the origin story, as in how you identified perhaps a need or a gap or a demand, and the motivation you had in embracing technology and bringing it to the fore in the way you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I have to admit it was a little bit right place, right time. You know, this was 2014. I was just out of school in Stockholm, where we're based, and I got a job working for Universal over the summer. And the first project that we got was this Swedish artist called Tove Lo. And you know, she had just kind of put out her first single. It was really taking off all over the world, pretty much everywhere except for in Scandinavia, which is her home market, right? And after trying everything, her A&R team came to us, the nerds, the data nerds, and they were like, "Can you figure out why this is not working?" And so what we did was we kind of made almost like a map of all the listener streams that we had access to on Spotify. And we tried to figure out, okay, are there any patterns in how people are consuming music? And this was, you know, a few years ago, so it's surely changed since then. But at that time, the biggest group, the most loyal group of consumers was actually dads over 35 who would stream the same rock albums over and over every weekend. Of course, that was not Tove Lo's best audience. But what we found was that in every market where she took off, there was this counterculture of alternative hipsters that would always find the music first, and then when she got big enough in that audience, she would then transfer over to the mainstream. But you always had to start there first, because otherwise you just didn't have the credibility as an artist. And we found that in Sweden we just don't have enough hipsters, and unfortunately, we're very mainstream.
Okay.
And so we're like, okay, you know, we need to find another way in here. And so we found that was in the dance space. And so we did a song called Heroes with Tove Lo and Alesso that, you know, ended up, you know, doing really well and was, I think, peaked at number 15 in the world. And that was kind of the first time that people said, oh my God, you could actually listen to data to figure out if an artist is going to be a hit or not. And that was also, of course, you know, if you think about it, yes, on one end, if you aggregate it, it's hundreds of millions of numbers. but behind every number, behind every stream that's done, is like somebody for whom this is the song of their first kiss, or the heartbreak, or getting in shape, etc., etc. And so really, I think, at least my view has always been that data allows you to understand that very human element on an aggregate level, so you can try to make better decisions. So like I said, that we did like a few more artists in the same vein. So we were the first in the world to break Shawn Mendes and make him #1. There was a song.
How did that happen actually with Shawn? Because I think that'll be quite interesting for somebody who perhaps is seen as an American artist, perhaps doesn't need that sort of moment of ignition. I guess after the fact, people tend to forget about it. I'm curious as to know.
Absolutely. So it's actually interesting that he had just been signed, and our job at the time was that Universal Music, where I worked then, had they were releasing about 350 songs a week, so they had to figure out, okay, what are we going to bet on? And my MD at the time, who I'm sure some people here are familiar with, would bang his fists on the table and go like, our market share is going down, like we need more hits. And so then it was my job to look through the data and find the ones who we could invest in. And at that time, there was this like 17-year-old kid from Canada who, without any promo, anything at all, was doing, like about 20, 30,000 streams in Sweden every single day with teenage girls. And we were like, you know what, if we like put some more marketing money into this, maybe this could grow like a bigger audience. And we did, and it reacted. Then we invested some more, and it reacted more. Then we flew him over to do like a promo tour in Sweden. It sold out within 2 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. And then, that was kind of how we then got the first #1 with Stitches. And ever since then, like, I think it's got a bit less now. But after that, after that case study, every artist then wanted to visit the Nordics to kind of, like the Billie Eilishes of the world, et cetera, wanted to like come here and start the story. Because I think, like some of the panelists said earlier, it's, the US is the biggest market, but it's also one of the hardest ones to break in. So you can bring in a story. And the frustration for me always in these stories was that it felt as if the data was one small piece of a very, very big puzzle. And I always kept getting obsessed with the fact that, maybe this could all be a bit more efficient if the facts and data was at the center of the decision making, and you used everything else to just amplify. And that was a little bit the origin story of SNAFU, which stands for Situation Normal, Always Fucked Up. And so,
wow, okay. That's amazing. Yeah. I can see why they didn't put it up there, though.
No, exactly. We're all friends here, right?
So you've learned your trade somewhat, or you've seen case experiences that you've been in control of at your previous job, and obviously the frustration was then growing.
Yeah.
What else, other than I guess that innate frustration, made you want to go and set up your company? Like, what was it that was I imagine that was some of a catalyst, but what other things do you feel like, or you felt like at the time, you could do better, or the sorts of artists you could target with your enterprise?
I think that's a great segue actually into, there was basically one number which made me want to quit my job, which is, at that time, and it's still the case, 70% of all the music consumption in the world is between the 3 major labels, Universal, Sony, Warner. But they now account for less than 1% of all the new music that comes out into the world, right? And that's kind of where I was like, oh my God, there must be some like girl in her bedroom in red. I'm just kidding. But it was always like, the girl in her bedroom in like Indonesia that's making incredible music that the world's dying to hear, but the bridge to connect them just doesn't exist today. Like, how are you going to listen through all the 5 million songs that get released every year? You can't. So why don't we build a machine that kind of aggregates that once again? So rather than relying on the gut feeling of 1 or 2 or 5 people, let's rely on the gut feelings of 100,000 people and see if we can bring it to 100 million. Was really kind of the, and it just felt like that change is going to happen, but it's going to go very slow. So we might as well try to do it ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, the idea of like, obviously traditional A&R, and the idea that it is this almost mythical council of selected individuals that just so happen to know what people want to hear through their own listening experiences or whatever, versus actually going to the people who are consuming that music and understanding their behavior, and then preempting that, I guess, and understanding. I mean, without wanting to give away trade secrets, I'm curious to know, what sort of parameters do you look at? Like, what sort of things allow you, what information within a massive data set helps you start and identify, I guess, well, actually, what is it you're trying to identify? Is it the sort of, is it the reaction of the music? Is it the sort of, what sort of statistics within that actually are most important for the parameter of artists you're working with?
It's so I would probably break it down into like three main things.
Okay.
The first is the velocity, with how quickly this artist is growing. So what we look at is basically just a lot of consumption data, and we say, okay, last week this artist, yesterday this artist had 5,000 streams, today they're at like 8,000. That's like a pretty straightforward one. The second one is sentiment. So we look at when people comment around an artist on Twitter, on Instagram, TikTok, et cetera, how passionate are the words that they use when they describe the artist. So are they saying, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard? Or are they saying, oh, this is pretty good, kind of thing? And then the third one, which has historically been the most controversial, is we look at the structure of the songs themselves. And then we compare that structure to the top 200 on Spotify at any given time. And generally we want like a similarity of about 70% with what's currently popular. And based on these factors, then you can figure out, okay, these are the artists that we think are underappreciated today, basically. And then, of course, you're looking for artists that can really grow at least 10x from that.
Got it. So within those three, the dimensions really tend to be level of interaction, thus the velocity, how many people are actually listening, which makes sense.
Exactly.
I like the idea of actually being able to, I didn't realize you did this, the sort of contextual information, the actual fan reaction.
The engagement.
Yeah, exactly, but doing it in a way that's perhaps a little bit more human, if you will, in terms of actually the commenting and the vernacular people use. And then ultimately the structure is the most interesting one, because that, in a way, we could argue, isn't too different in a pre-technological world. You know, like there are, if you kind of read interviews or watch some of the greatest songwriters or producers historically, they themselves learned their craft by consuming and mimicking or idolizing or recreating the pop songs of their generation or before that. You know, I think there is something to be said about that. Ultimately, data isn't necessarily making this unoriginal for the sake of it. It's actually tapping into previous behaviors of what it takes to actually make something successful.
That's a great point. That's an absolutely great point that I totally agree with. And that was kind of, you know, I think, like you said, a little bit of a black box to me before we started with, you know, with this company, with Snafu, because one of my partners, I have, you know, really big privilege to, you know, to be able to work with one of the best, you know, songwriters, actually globally, a guy called Carl Falk, and I kind of like started to, you know, I guess get indoctrinated with this, let's say, Scandinavian songwriter school of thought of like really looking at a song like it's an equation that needs to be balanced, you know, and it's very, and the reason I feel that Scandinavia has been on top of like the songwriting world for so long is that we have a system, like a toolbox that transcends time, and I think that's kind of, I think our job, which what I felt with technology, and I think what will be like the songwriting of the future, is how can you take this knowledge that's historically been in very, very isolated pockets, like, you know, the Max Martin crew and you know, certain out of Norway and Denmark, et cetera, and try to bring that to the world, you know, at a much larger scale.
Yeah, so you could almost democratize it to an extent, as in it's less sort of ad hoc and sort of gatekeeped in sort of these indeterminate ways, but instead using that data, facilitating a growth of knowledge, I guess.
Exactly, because today the knowledge is in the brains of, like, let's say, like probably 20, 25 people in the world who are, you know, who like repeatedly tend to have like #1 songs, and that's, you know, it's not, and then of course the way that you get into this is that you're an apprentice for one of these writers or producers for like 5 years, where you sit in like in the studio in a corner and don't ask any questions for a few years, and then you can start to have your own projects. And, you know, we're at probably like the 4th or 5th generation now. Like, you know, Max Martin learned from someone, and then he had like a team, and then now they've had like people that they've kind of, you know, had under their wing, who are now, you know, on top of their games. So I think this thing about song similarity actually comes from my producer partner Carl, who mentioned, when they were doing the original One Direction albums, he was like, you know what, like the key to like a hit pop song is you need to make it sound like something you've heard before, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is, so you're gonna want to like listen to it over and over again. And I was like, oh my God, that's why all of the songs of that first album sounds like an old Backstreet Boys song. And of course, it's the same guys at every time. And so that was kind of the question, right? Like, how do you take that, but maybe turn it into something that a machine can understand, so you could offer that service to more people?
Totally. I guess on the flip side of this, offering a counter argument, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this. How you feel that this data as a whole, potentially the way you're attempting to master it and put it together, whether that stifles the extraneous variables of music, as in, do we end up potentially finding ourselves in a repeating pattern where we're creating various versions of similar sounds or soundscapes, and we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity for, I don't know, it's a topical example because of Stranger Things, but like a new Kate Bush, for example, somebody who even at her period of time was not the main, and ultimately had to have, a journey that was actually fairly haphazard. Whether the technology we have now and the data is still exercising those people, if actually making their journey harder, or if in fact it can actually also benefit them.
It's a question that we've like had a very intense debate about internally as well, because I think it is also like a big responsibility that you really don't want to end up in a place where machines are making music for other machines to listen to. And you think about like the internet, any website these days is not written for humans to read, it's written for other machines to like be search engine optimized, right? And we really don't want to get to like the search engine optimization of music in a similar way. And I think that's I have to admit, like, I don't think we really have the answer to that yet. But I completely share your concern in that, how do we kind of make room for the misfits? I will say there is one study that I was reading recently that I thought was very interesting, in that there's like an American researcher, I think from Stanford, who looked through all the historical number ones on Billboard, I think, and so the songs that were most similar to what was already popular, those artists had a much shorter lifespan on the top than artists that came with a completely new sound and made it to the top, and then those were the artists that had the most longevity. So we definitely see in the data as well that if you're able to kind of thread that needle between what the market is ready for but doesn't expect, it does pay off as well. We haven't quite figured out how exactly to do that with the tech yet, but that's absolutely the goal as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, that makes total sense. I mean, I think it's that sort of rule transcends music, but into other creative entities. I mean, I know we've spoken previously about Raymond Loewy, who was a French-American industrialist who kind of was working in design, and he came up with like the Lucky Strike logo and Greyhound bus logo. He designed the Coke bottle, and he came up with a theory called the Maya theory, which is the most advanced yet acceptable. The idea being that you needed in design to create something that pushed people but wasn't so abstract they'd have no idea what it is. And I think that's true of a lot of popular music, and testament to Raymond, his designs have lasted the test of time. They have huge longevity. And I think it's true, like you say, of certain pop music as well. If you're able to find that balance, it's understanding how technology then can help those artists, I guess, rather than them having yet another hurdle to overcome. With the artists that you do work with, I'd be interested to get a gauge of perhaps not a case study, but some lessons or learnings you've had from the technology, not just in discovering those artists, but perhaps how you use it to help them after you've started working with them. Is that sort of a part of it as well?
100%. So there's a couple that I think that really stand out. The first, let's say, I'll take like three very quick ones.
Great. Yeah.
I'll say the first one is actually one of the first artists we ever signed. There were these two guys from the middle of nowhere in like Little Rock, Arkansas, called Joan, and both. That's probably like the most expensive flight ticket I've ever booked, because like it's impossible to get from Little Rock, Arkansas to Stockholm. But we found them on I think like day 2 when they put out one of their first songs, and they had like less than 2,000 fans at the time, but like every single comment, the sentiment thing was every single comment was just like people losing their minds at how fresh and cool and amazing it sounded. And so we took a chance on them, and like within 12 months they were touring the world, a few 100 million streams, you know, and still counting. They're still, you know, they're still growing. That was kind of, you know, I guess like a testament to the, you know, to the finding part. Then, you know, in terms of actually like putting it into work, there's this other girl that we signed recently called Kings, and our thesis there was that she already had like a very big TikTok audience, and there we just felt, okay, what's missing is really some great songs, and so that's kind of where we got her with some of our songwriters, and then basically worked with our TikTok team that basically like scrapes all the comments to try to figure out what the people want, what content is working out there at the moment, and then like did a content plan with her, and you know, I think the third or the fourth post that she did around the song, it blew up and she grew like 15, 20 times just off of that. And I think that's also like another thing where like technology like really helps for your music to break through. Actually, Aurora had a huge moment right last year with, you know, with a song on TikTok, and that's one of the things where creating each piece of content doesn't really cost anything, right? So like the resources needed for making like 100 pieces of content is not that much different from making 5 or 6, right? Except for the time that you put in. But when one of those 100 hits, then like the rewards are outsized. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of then where we try to like aim the technology as well. Like what's trending right now, what sorts of content pieces can we do, how long should it be, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting point because we so often see artists who, either by design or by accident, have these moments of virality or discovered as such as a result. And then it's kind of, it's a cliff edge sometimes, you know? It's kind of like people just expect that people will continue to be crazy happy with this artist and want to keep listening. But unless you perpetuate a story or create a story to perpetuate, you aren't necessarily giving people a fingerhold into the person rather than the song.
Right.
And I think it's such an interesting way of looking at technology, not just as identifying talent. Because I mean, when I was working at major labels, we had a raft of A&R tools. You know, we had one at Warner called Sodatone, which was almost this sort of like platform of like, you know, kind of artist discovery. But for somebody like me who didn't grow up with that, as much as I'm not super old, kind of old, like I was so used to doing it by ear, but to see all of it just relayed like that was one thing. But then the frustration of finding something great by that or otherwise and dropping it in the ocean and expecting it to continue to succeed was really depressing, you know? So the idea of what you're saying, as in you have this artist, they have success, but instead then listen to the audience, understand what things they're interested in, topics, what themes with that artist they actually connect to, and then like filling that gap, creating content that will actually make it interesting. Because I think ultimately what we're, as a manager, as an artist, as an industry, what we're competing for now is people's time. Right. You know, you're less focused on, got to get this many things sold this week because next week someone else is going to sell something else. Right. If you have an artist with longevity, you want to make sure people, in the short time they have each day to dedicate it to music or to culture, are interested and compelled enough with what you're creating. So instead of just shooting in the dark, it makes total sense to actually listen to your audience.
100%.
I appreciate we're kind of coming close to time, but with that in mind, from the artists that you've worked with and learning the lessons you've had, using Snafu as a vehicle of this conversation, what do you see the sort of next generation being? Like what, in addition to you're doing now, what aspects of the technology meeting the music industry are only going to further evolve our understanding of how much we can actually use this data?
It's you know, we've thought quite a bit about this in terms of, you know, what the next step might be in this I guess evolution. I would say if we took a step back to look at kind of how far we've come in the evolution, let's say even 20 years ago, there were about 50,000 songs that were coming out into the world. Now it's about 5 million, so it's gone up like 100 times. And what is the reason for that 5 million, right? One, it's basically that distribution has gotten so easy. Like you could record something in your bedroom and like put it out and reach millions of people. But you still need probably tens of thousands of crowns worth of equipment, probably years of training to like make something that really sounds good. I think that's going to be the thing that changes next, in that it's going to become easier and easier to make music. So I think instead of 5 million songs coming out there, it's probably going to be 50 million in, you know, within the next 10 years. I think we'll probably start to see a lot more gig producers and songwriters that, you know, do it as something on the side because they enjoy it. So I absolutely think there's going to be like an avalanche of more music that comes out into the world as it gets easier and easier to make music, so that that your creativity is not then limited by your ability to actually get what's in your mind down onto sheet music or onto like your keyboard, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that that really is going to be one of the big tech trends that I feel. I think the second is songwriters and artists and just people that are involved in the making of songs will really need to start becoming a lot more data-driven in terms of how they work and how they see things. Historically, songwriters and publishers have always kind of been at the end of the chain. So like Spotify and like Apple and the platforms are always the best and they see the best data. Second best is probably the labels. Third is probably like the managers who have access to what the labels have. And then like at the end is like the songwriter who basically, in a lot of cases, even in some of the best ones that we work with, they get like a call and go like, hey, can you send me some songs for Rihanna? And then, you basically put together a Dropbox with 5 songs and send it out into the ether. And like maybe 2 years later, you get a call saying, hey, is this still available? Maybe we'd like to, and I think there's so much room for that to change in terms of trying to, using tools to figure out how your music is being listened to, even if it hasn't been released yet.
Totally. And I think something I've noticed as well is what data is allowing is a redesign of how artists as creators can find teams. And, traditionally to release music, other than to do it oneself, if you needed funding or a team, you would ultimately go to a record label.
Right.
And that was because they were principally the people who had the most amount of money and the access to market. They increasingly are less exclusive, the access to market. And I think the means to getting capital is becoming so much more varied. I'm not sure if you're familiar with a platform called Indify.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Indify started as an A&R research tool, but is now moved as to be somewhat of a middle company between artists who are self-releasing or have created their own music, but are seeking teams and or capital to further whatever they're at that point. And what Indify does is it allows the artists to upload their music and their information and to almost present like either a specific offer, as in I need this amount of money for this release for these reasons, but then for artist and said capital investment, who could be anyone who's sort of invited to use the platform, whether it's a manager or a private investor or whatever, to actually negotiate that deal directly with the artist. But as to make that set of decisions, you're presented as a user of this platform with a huge amount of information about how many daily streams that song has or that artist has and how much music they've released and where it's coming from. So it's sort of almost totally devoid of A&R, which is amazing in a lot of ways. It's totally just about creator and intellectual property and said investor or team and bringing those teams together for those reasons and creating deal terms that are very simple and very transparent. It's literally just a form in which then Indify become an arbitrator. And I think it's so important in artists reclaiming the autonomy of their intellectual property and becoming much more than just a passenger in their own journey, if you know what I mean. So, and you're a part of that anyway, obviously, with the work you do and everything. So, anyhow, we're reaching party time.
We are.
And very keen to throw it to the room. If anyone has any questions or considerations or anyone hates computers, feel free to say that now. No? We're amazing. We've covered everything.
Yeah, we did.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Tusen takk, Ben, Ankit. Da gjenstår det egentlig bare å takke for denne delen av denne dagen. Takke alle som har deltatt, alle som har vært gjester, alle som har fullført Musikk Ut i Verden, og som har inspirert og engasjert oss. Og ikke minst til alle som lager musikken, som løfter musikken, og som lytter til musikken. Takk alle sammen. Margit vil jeg også veldig gjerne takke. Og takke Innovasjon Norge for samarbeidet. You did it.
I must say this in English. I feel really inspired and grateful to be able to have listened to all these fantastic people in these panels. And you did a fantastic job also moderating, konferansier rollen. And to you, great people sitting here as an audience, been holding out for 3 hours. Hope
Nå skal vi drikke øl. Det sommer, det sommerfest, og så det jo festivalsesong. Så hvis du ikke har gjort det enda, så vil jeg oppfordre alle til å kjøpe en konsertbillett eller en festivalbillett, og komme dere ut og se på den fantastiske musikken. Men god sommer, så lenge, og så ses vi i baren. Og dere vet hvem dere skal finne? Rosa!